The Millennium Development Goals were objectives established in 2000 in order to make the world a more equal place. But we are in 2013 and everybody knows that they will not be reached. Why is that?
Two things. Well, in fact, since the Millennium Goals have been set, there has been lots of progress. You can't deny the progress. There have been many people around the world who have moved out of poverty. And there are certainly greater access to healthcare for many people and education. The problem is that the distribution of the benefits of the MDGs has been unequal. So I would say that parts of Latin America, parts of Asia have done very well, and poverty levels, particularly in China, have dropped dramatically. But in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, there has not been those sorts of benefits. And what you've had instead is as I said before, this massive growing inequality of many more people being very wealthy and a similar number of people being very, very poor. And the gap between the very wealthy and the very poor is growing. So any new Millennium Goals, any new generation of goals has got to try to address the inequality issue. It's got to try to make sure that most of the world's population have the basics in life and can have a say in how their lives are lived and formed. And that has to be for sub-Saharan Africa, it has to be for the 300 million untouchables and Dalits in India, it has to be for those left behind in China. It's got to be across the world.
Do you feel that it is possible to have developed economies all over the world? Do you think it will be sustainable to have China and India and sub-Saharan Africa have well-developed economies? Do you think the world will be sustainable like that?
Personally, no. I think the mathematics doesn't add up. The World Bank have estimated a few years ago that if everybody in the world lived on the same living standards as us in London or in Lisbon, then it would take 3 planets. They're now saying it probably takes 4. So we cannot live the same way. But we can, through better sharing, through better use of resources, we can all live reasonably good lives. And we can live lives where our basic needs are met. That is possible, but that would require those of us in the richer parts of the world to consume a little less, to consume less goods and materials and energy, and it would require a greater fair share and a proper carbon-friendly development in many parts of the emerging countries like China, India, Brazil, and the poorer countries of the world as well.
Some experts say that after 2015 you need to redirect the Millennium Development Goals to more specific areas and make them less global, more assertive to certain realities. Do you feel that we'll have a number of the new Millennium Development Goals with other names or anything more addressed to certain areas of the planet?
I think I want both. Mm-hmm. The problem with just contextual plans and so on is that they are not universal. And it's easy for countries or groups of people to determine those differently. The big advantage of the Millennium Development Goals was that everybody said that everyone had to have food, everyone had to have education, everyone had to have basic health care. So these were universal. So there has to be, I think, a universal set of goals, preferably involving more sustainable ways of living as well. But at the same time, you've got to have country-specific, more contextual plans for regions and groups of people as well. So I think it's both.
Here in Portugal, and I don't know if in other countries, we have FEC has some projects in education for development, working with the children in the schools and making them more aware of these questions. Do you feel that this work can benefit not only the view for developing countries, but also the future of the developed countries itself?
I'm absolutely convinced by that. What we're going to be moving towards in the future is a world of global citizens. You're not going to be isolated in Portugal, if you ever were, but you're certainly not going to be now, the same way in London, the same way in Sierra Leone, the same way in Guinea-Bissau. You're all part of a world. And the more we understand that complexity on the one hand, of how we have to live together, the more we understand the multicultural nature of the world, the more we understand the problems faced by the slum dwellers of Kenya, but also some of the high-rise dwellers of Lisbon, and see that as part of a global pattern of rich and poor, justice and injustice, the better. So I think that you have to have that sense of children growing up, wherever they are, believing they're just one world, we're living in one world, and believing that they're citizens of that world, not just citizens of their own country.
That's working to the future and not to the present. But this society sometimes teaches us that the present is important and the future doesn't matter. So how do you change that way of thinking?
It's not easy. I mean, it's very easy to say, I want something now. We live in a society where you turn on the telly and you're being exposed by all these wonderful things and you want them now. It's going to take a long process. I think the church has got a strong part in this by accepting that not only are we individuals and individual people as creations of God, but we're also part of society. We're part of the human family, and we have a responsibility to be both good individuals but also good neighbours. And that's going to take time, and it's going to take leadership. It's going to take leadership from politicians, it's going to take leadership from church leaders, it's going to take young people actually working within their peer groups and saying, we cannot live like this. We've got to start thinking differently.
What do you feel are the main objectives for CIDSE in the short term? What are the main concerns now?
Well, I think the first concern is that we have a global development model of economic growth that is simply not sustainable. Simply not sustainable. So we must be looking at other ways to say what is important for development, whether that's low carbon development on an industrial sense, whether that's greater human development, whether that's making sure that there's coherence in communities, but a more what we would call within the Catholic faith an authentic human development has got to be something we've got to move forward that's beyond money, beyond consumerism. The second thing linked to that is that we're living in a time of growing climate change and growing environmental degradation. And again, that's not sustainable. We've got to do something about reducing the carbon footprint of the planet and reducing the way we consume resources that are non-renewable. A third area is I think we've got to bring people together. We cannot no longer have the state, the civil society and the church, the private sector and the businesses. If we really are going to solve this problem, there's got to be a greater sense of working together with all the actors, all the stakeholders in development. And in some respects, that's holding governments and it's holding businesses to account to deal properly in the world and do their business properly in the world. So I'd say those three areas would be the big areas. In the short term, we have a new generation of Millennium Development Goals or Sustainable Development Goals. We need to work towards those.